All right, hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here, and thank you for joining me. My name is Sarah. I'm currently doing my placement with Derek, well, with you, everybody, at Trans Wellness Ontario. I'm doing this placement through a class at U Windsor through my Women's and Gender Studies program. And I've honestly been trying to ask more questions and learn more, because I like to say that we're all on a learning journey. And I'm currently on mine, and I would like to expand my learning. And I feel that everyone here would be a great resource for me to pick your brains and learn some more from you. I'm looking to ask you more about language and the role it plays in the provision of both service and just care in general, whether it's in a professional setting or in our personal relationships in our lives, because we all have to provide care at some point, whether we realize it or not. It's the way we exist in the world. That's just how humans are. So I want to ask you what someone like me who isn't trans can do to ensure that the care that they're providing is not only inclusive, but also affirming to the person that they're supporting, and also productive to the growth of both their human being existence and the person that they're supporting, their growth and their well-being. And if that's okay with everybody, I'm going to pass it to Derek and let them take us on this journey.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I want to, say such a warm welcome to everyone who perhaps is listening, taking a part in the recording of this panel, and of course to my colleagues, Sydney and Melissa, who are here on this call with me, on behalf of Trans Wellness Ontario. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to work with you, Sarah, during the placement and help supervise that. And a big thank you to Sydney and Melissa for the conversations that have happened in reflection to what we've talked about within that placement and the meetings that we've had in preparing for this panel. And my name is Derek Carl Bizzo. I go by Derek, Carl, and Dija, and I use they, them, theirs as my pronouns exclusively. And I volunteer with Trans Wellness Ontario in many different capacities. I've been a part of the organization and received some supports from the organization, as well as I work now with the Q-Link Collaborative of Windsor Pride Community and Windsor Pride Fest, and Family Services Windsor Essex, doing some program administration and facilitation. Lots of fun arts-based stuff. And so I'd like to answer this question from like a personal and professional kind of standpoint in brief. For me, one thing as I've been reflecting on this question of kind of beyond inclusion and, what does affirming care, affirming support look like? Really thinking about how, as you said, this is a journey that we're all on, caring for one another. And I think one thing that I've noticed with a lot of care providers that I've either tried to receive care from or support in different ways as they provide care is sometimes that lack of understanding that one who perhaps is not queer or trans also still has gender, has sexuality, and that we are all on a journey of coming to discover what that is for ourselves in a genuine way. I think for so many people, it's assumed of them, right? This is what we challenge as trans people and as queer people, is the assumptions that we were often made around cisgender heterosexuality that structures a lot of our social life. And so, we're challenging those assumptions and claiming our identity. And the reality is, and I had said this to my father not too long ago on a walk, is that you have a gender, you have a sexuality. And if that is, you are cisgender and you are heterosexual. Huzzah! That's your gender, that's your sexuality. And in the same way that I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, huzzah! That's my gender, that's my sexuality. I have words to describe it. How beautiful, how wonderful. And I can talk about what brought me to those words. I can talk about what in my life makes me go to those words to describe my experiences, and why I choose these words to describe my experiences as the most descript. And in the same way, my father and others, who are cisgender and heterosexual can kind of reflect on the way gender is constructed, the assumptions made about them, the assumptions they've made about themselves. Are they true? Is there any validity to them? Are they false? Is there something maybe more to their particular experience? And are there different words that maybe are better describers. They're more particular, right? They touch the experience that's so hard to describe so much better than other words. And so I think part of what I feel challenged by is that a lot of people are working on inclusion, inclusivity. And so you'll find that the words perhaps are used gay, queer, trans, and perhaps there's ways of trying to recognize people use different pronouns, right? Or maybe don't have a different identity. And so forms are becoming a bit more inclusive. There's a few more boxes to check. Or perhaps I'm even kind of given that chance to be honored, right? Where my pronouns, oh, you use they, them pronouns? No problem. I'll do that for sure. I respect people's pronouns. I say, thank you so much. But then we continue on, and all these assumptions about both myself, other people, based on cisgender heterosexuality, right, continue to come up. And so they haven't gone through that journey. There's not that awareness, right, of their own gender, their own sexuality, some of those challenges around the assumptions that are made, and continuing on and on. And so I just find that there's a lot of people who are with good intentions trying to be inclusive, but aren't able to really affirm a lot of my experiences because they haven't been going on that journey yet themselves, right? It's just sort of like, oh, you're different than me. I can respect your differences. It's like, yes, and we're all different though. So like there's this particularity of understanding our differences and how to approach difference in a really kind of respectful and honorable way. And one way that I kind of liken it is this recognition I've been given that I need to be more than just an ally when it comes to anti-racism efforts. I can't just take a backseat and listen. I can't just be there to kind of show up, learn, and leave. I got to do the work. I got to be an anti-racist. You know, I got to be someone out there trying to struggle against the racism that exists in our society as a white person. Who cares? Who believes in anti-racism and anti-oppression? I need to do some work. I need to stand side by side. I need to speak up, you know, because I'm the person in the room, because I'm the person that sees and I know better. And I think I need people who are trying to provide care, who call themselves allies for queer and trans people, to do that kind of work, to recognize they have a gender, they have a sexuality, they have unearned privileges because of maybe, depending on their gender and their sexuality, they may be experiencing a lot of unearned privilege, right? A lot of access to support and resources, unfairly so, just because they fit into the dominant ideology of cisgender and heterosexuality. And queer and trans people aren't, you know, given that same sort of support and whatnot. And they should be struggling with us for that, right? They shouldn't be telling me, oh, I'll respect your pronouns, but I know nothing. So you're gonna have to teach me everything to care for you adequately, to support you, right? Because that's what happens, is I meet people with good intentions, but they're not on that journey. They're not doing that work. And they're sort of still treating me with this sense of difference that feels very alienating, you know, that makes me feel like I'm not going to get the support I need here. And it's not affirming. They'll include me. They won't kick me out of the room, but I don't feel affirmed. I feel gross leaving there because it's like, okay, so I came for care and now I'm the educator, you know? And I've done this, like going in a crisis center, being like, I'm in a crisis. They're like, oh, you're trans. We've had a few trans people here before. But, you know, maybe you could help me because I don't really understand. It's like, oh my gosh, like I need care right now. That's what I need. And we can't be just waiting for a queer person to work here to say, oh, there's another queer person. Go see the queer person. Right now, if I want to go see a queer person, I should be able to, right? That'd be nice, that very direct shared experience. But the reality is, I just need help, you know? And so I don't really care who it comes from, as long as it's affirming, right? As long as it matches the fact that I have these experiences, this is who I am, and hopefully not being actively oppressed, you know, as I try to get care. So that's kind of my main point I wanted to make. I think a bit more at length than at brief, but both in my professional and personal experience, right? It's just realizing that a lot of people are doing some of the code, right? They're using the language, they're coding things in a bit more of an appropriate way, but there's still not that understanding, right? That we're all struggling under cis heteropatriarchy and all of these norms around sex and gender that oppress us all. And our liberation shared. So we all got to be on that work and journey together in solidarity with each other. And so I think that that's my call, you know, my call to arms, call to action is to kind of recognize like you're on that journey, do that research, do that reflection, see all of the assumptions that, you know, have been made of you and limiting you and all of that, to understand, you know, more and more what it's actually like to be queer and trans, and to have such an awareness of that component of your identity, which we all also share. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much for, giving us this space to talk about this. I really enjoy getting to air some of this, because this is part of the struggle in trying to get care and work in the community, right? Is good intentions, but people not really understanding what work is needed to be able to do it well, and to be able to do it in a way without requiring us to do so much more, right? As now needing to be extra educators, or another hat of education on top of everything else we're trying to do. Could I pass it perhaps to my colleague Sydney to kind of share some of Nair's own ideas as well as experiences and expertise?
Thank you, Derek, so much for that and for starting us off. And I think a lot of the things that you touched on regarding, being aware of your own identity is really important, because a lot of times cisgender and heterosexual people don't question things. They don't bother to explore because they're, the norm, right? They're the majority. And that's the experience that has been prioritized and taught. So they never think to explore anything. And as a result, then when people are like, oh, I'm actually not that, then they have a lot of questions and they expect us to have answers. And one of the things that I really encourage, especially cisgender people, to do is called the Cisgender Identity Challenge. And you can find this on our website at transwellness.ca/resources. And it's really always interesting to watch cisgender people do this challenge, because it asks them to explain their gender and describe how they know, without referencing body parts, without referencing how they present themselves. And a lot of times cisgender people are like, I have no idea, I just am. It's like, exactly, because people just know we are who we are, and we shouldn't have to justify that. We shouldn't have to explain it, just to exist and to be respected and validated and affirmed for who we are, right? So it's really important for cisgender and heterosexual people to do that intensive work of exploring their own gender, exploring their own sexuality, as a way of being an ally to those who have had to do the work, to find the terms that feel right, to claim this for ourselves, right? And then not expecting us to educate you either, right? As Derek had mentioned, that's really important, because a lot of times any space that we walk into, we're expected to be the educators, right? And I mean, I serve as the education coordinator here at Trans Wellness Ontario. So I literally get paid to do this work, but it's still tiring sometimes, right? Because I do this work here and I do this outside in the community and in my family with my friends, and it's constant, right? And especially with my pronouns, because my pronouns are they, them, near. And as soon as I say that, then I get this confused look from people who are like, what? What's that? And then I get the question, what are those pronouns? Like, how do you use those? I don't understand. Like, why don't you just use they, them, right? So as a result, I've crafted this entire spiel about, okay, this is the history of my pronouns. This is why I chose them. This is how you use them. And a lot of times queer and trans people have to have these pre-prepared scripts, right? Number one questions we get, oh, when did you come out? When did you know? What was your coming out experience like? Do you have a relationship with your family? How do I use your pronouns? Like, how do you know who you are, right? And we have to have these pre-prepared scripts, because we get these questions so often, sometimes on a daily basis, right? In so many of our interactions. And we shouldn't have to do that, right? That's where allies need to step up in not asking those questions, but challenging people and saying, hey, it's not their job to educate you. Do the research yourself, figure it out. There's lots of great resources online, right? That you shouldn't be expecting that emotional labor from queer and trans people to constantly have to explain things to justify who we are, right? So that's a big part, is just being aware of these experiences, educating yourself, right? We always say that that's one of the key components of allyship and providing care, right? Is educating yourself so that people that you're supporting and people in your life don't have to be the educators. Because when I can go into a space where I know that I don't have to educate, and I'm not going to be misgendered, I'm not going to have odd questions and sometimes deeply personal and uncomfortable and inappropriate questions, right? It's that breath of relief. It's like, okay, finally a space where I can take off the educator hat, because I don't get to do that very often, right? So being that space where they can take the educator hat off, they can just be and know that they are going to be affirmed. And a big part of that, of course, is pronouns. And that's a big part of coming to education, right? And practicing is using somebody's correct pronouns. So one of my other roles here at Trans Wellness, I'm the non-binary transition guide. And consistently, I've seen a lot of clients who will start off using they, them pronouns. And then when they talk to me and they hear that I use neopronouns, they're like, oh, this is actually a space where I can use my real pronouns, where I can use mixed pronouns, or I can use neopronouns, because they start off with they, them, because that person doesn't want to have to explain, right? They don't want to have to be more likely to be misgendered, right? So leaving that space for people to use their actual pronouns with you and making sure that you're using those pronouns is really important. Like, I have a client who used 5 different neo pronouns, and it's like, okay, this case note's going to take a little while to write, but I need to do it, right? It's important for that client, in affirming that client for who they are, right? And making sure that you are doing the practicing work, you are doing the education, because this matters, right? When people are misgendering us, we're hearing that constant invalidation. I don't respect you. I don't affirm you. This is not a safe space for you to be your full self. And I had a really important conversation with one of my professors a few months ago, where I noticed he had been consistently getting better with using my actual pronouns. I'm like, thank you. I've noticed that you've been doing the work, you've been practicing, like you've been getting my real pronouns right. And he seemed surprised, and he's like, you noticed that? And I'm like, oh yeah. We notice every time. We notice when people are using the right pronouns. We notice when they're trying. We notice when they don't bother trying, right? Because this is such a fundamental part of our existence, is our identity, right? This is wrapped around who we are as a person. And when people are using our correct pronouns, using the language that we ask them to use, then that is creating that safe space. That is what affirming care is about. It's about celebrating and honoring all parts of a person's self, even if that takes a little bit more work on your end. So yeah, every time that a client's like, okay, I think I want to try these pronouns, I'm like, great, give me a day to practice and I'm good, right? Or I'll change the name on your case file as many times. You want to use a different name every single session? That's fine. We'll change the name every single session, right? Just giving them the space to be able to explore and find that for themselves is really important, and walking with them through that journey, even if it's 12 names or 20 names or 2 names or different pronouns every time or every minute, right? Respecting and affirming and honoring all parts of that person and walking with them is how we provide affirming care. I'm going to pass things over to my colleague Melissa now to talk about from their perspective as a registered social worker.
So I'm Melissa. I'm a registered social worker here at Trans Wellness Ontario, and I've recently stepped into the position of Director of Client Care and Operations. So I wear a couple different hats here. And I just want to echo what Derek and Sydney said, that inclusion is nice, but it's pretty basic. We need to go further than that. We need to go beyond inclusion, beyond competence, into understanding. And one of the ways that we can do that is to go on our own journey. So last year, when I started working here, I felt very prepared. Actually, I'll just give a shout out to the Women and Gender Studies program at University of Windsor for preparing me for this. And I didn't realize that I was on my own gender journey for those 6 years that I was in university. I was reading things, I was watching things, we were having great discussions, and I was going inward. I wasn't ready to do the work with people yet, and that's okay. I was in university still. And so what I was doing was I was getting to know myself. And as my colleague said, we really need to know ourselves before we can work with other people. So how am I, as a social worker, going to say, I'm going to walk with you on this gender journey if I haven't done it myself, right? So that's what I did. I thought about my gender. I thought about my sexuality, and I thought, oh, I figured all this out when I was 15, didn't I? No, I didn't. So a lot of times when people go, when heterosexual and cisgender people go on this gender journey, they might have the same results at the end. They might be like, yeah, I'm exactly who I said I am. But you know what? Often it's not the case. You might look at some different terminology and be like, oh, that really speaks to me. That honors me. And so when I figured out what honors me, I was better equipped to ask other people what honors them, and to sit in the room with them and to share that space together and say, in my head, of course, hey, I've done this work and now I know how to do this work with you. So I think that, like I said, beyond like that competence, that's the bare minimum. Inclusion is the bare minimum. if I can't walk through your door and be accepted, I mean, that's a crime. But I need more than that. Okay. I want real allyship, which means work. And it's not that hard to grab a workbook, a gender workbook at Indigo, or, borrow one for me if you want. But it's the important, necessary work that we have to do in order to work with other people. That's like the main point that I want to say, is that in order to be a service provider in the trans and queer community, you have to go within first. You have to know yourself. You have to honor yourself and be true to yourself. And once you do that, it's a lot easier to help other people on their journey. And
I want to
that's all
say such a thank you. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. I'm clapping over here, smiling, laughing. Thank you both so much for everything that you shared there in your response. I just want to take a brief moment to touch on a few things that I really felt connected to, and that I wanted to kind of like, ooh, that thing, before we kind of wrap our time together. The first thing I wanted to say is like, yeah, I'm on my journey still, right? 29-year-old, when you said like, when I was 15, figured it all out. I remember that moment. It's like, I'm a gay boy. And then like 10 years down the road, I'm like, oh, honey, like there is so much more happening right now. And it's like, now I feel like a non-binary lesbian. Like it's just the changes and the orientation that one finds oneself as we start to see the world in its fullness, as we start to meet many others on their own paths, their own expressions. It's like, oh my gosh, like the bell of truth, the light within, I don't know, something connects, right? So I just wanted to say, like, I relate to that so much, that I'm on this journey. And the more that I allow myself to recognize that fluidity or that potential change and growth, how much more kind of interesting everything's become, right? It just is like, these words we reach for, and we reach for them because they're more descriptive than others, but in reality it's so hard to put this into words, right? This magic of life and this precious gift of experience. So anyway, just want to be like, I'm still on that journey. I relate to that. Also, blessed women gender studies program at my school was called Diversity and Social Justice Studies. It was a former women gender studies, but we were talking about race, we were talking about class, we're talking about poverty, and we're talking about everything under the sun through a lens of the power and the material realities that people are going through, and their analysis of why, how, and all these other things. It was just such an empowering experience. And so I just want to be like, woohoo, prop that up, shout out. And then third, a point that was talked about is kind of that this is like a shared journey, right? We're all on a journey of our own identity. And I thought how important it is to recognize that it's a shared educational journey. As I just said, I'm still on my journey, I'm learning, I'm growing. And so like, although I take on the hat of educator, like you do, Sydney, in a professional way, in a personal way, in my relationships, I'm a learner too, right? We all are. And I think we shift in and out of these roles to help each other. But the one thing that's so important and kind of, rings back to that whole taking an anti-racism approach as a white person is that I should have some insights, I should be learning things, being like, ooh, I'm realizing things. I'm seeing things more clearly now. I can name things I couldn't name before. And I should be talking to my friends who are racialized as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color about these things. So they can say, oh, yes, Derek. Oh, no, Derek, And so I'm not necessarily going like, teach me, but I'm going saying I'm learning. And here's some of the things I'm learning, right? And I can learn a lot more when I share that learning process with other people going through that experience too. And so it's something about being a part of a learning community. And I think that's really the invitation for cisgendered and heterosexual people, or people who identify as cisgender, heterosexual, who are not queer, not trans, to realize, right, is that they're a part of a learning community. And as you said, Sydney, like we kind of got to go on this journey because like the words are inadequate. We're so oppressed and can't breathe and can't live under the system of a cisgender binary, of our heterosexuality patriarchy, that we start to reach for these words. We've created these words, right, as members of this community, right? And so we gotta, but we all gotta, right? We really all do. And it's a beautiful shared experience. And it's really nice to be together in that sense of a learning community rather than expected just to be able to provide that information. Like it just doesn't work like that, right? That's like a false banking model that people still operate. Like it's just such a false thinking, and it'll never actually solve any problems, still trying to use solutions within that kind of logic model. One other thing I want to touch on before I close is just how important it is to correct as cisgender people, other cisgender people when they make mistakes. Don't leave it for trans people to do the correcting. Always make sure you've been given that sort of authority, because sometimes for safety reasons, we don't want you correcting people. We're trying to keep ourselves as safe as possible in a very inhospitable world at times. However, if you've had that conversation, you've checked in saying, okay, do you want me to correct people? Can I do that, in a conversation? Do I pull them aside? What's best according to you? Is that is good work. That's a part of that solidarity work. It's talking about it when there's not queer and trans people in the room that you're aware of. Assume that we're always around, but just in case, you're still doing the work always. But just like that happened not too long ago within my own relations, where someone said the other day, I misgendered you. You weren't around, but someone corrected me. And I just wanted to let you know, like, I made a mistake. I'm learning. And I'm like, I want to talk to that person who corrected you, saying, please keep doing that. Approved, like, I don't want to necessarily thank people for doing just what should be done, but I will. Oh my gosh, if it encourages them to keep doing it, I will. That's so important. It's so important. And then the last two things that I have in my paper is just the gift that we give when we create an affirming space, which I think both Melissa and Sydney both talked to really well. Is just like, oh, the sacred good work we do when we allow that room for creativity, when we allow that room for experimentation, exploration, discovery, when we say, I'm on this journey with you too, of course, it's this freedom we share with each other to be ourselves, to find out what that really means and what it could be. It is such sacred, important work. And I think, we started this conversation before the recording, just saying, who is this really for? And I think it's really for everyone at this point, after listening to the conversation. It really is for all of us to see how important these aspects are of ourselves, no matter what words we use, and how it is a shared journey that if we all realize we're on together, I think we'll see how challenging it is to be in this world where there's so much to limit our freedom. There's so much to try to tell us we're not valid and do not affirm us as queer and trans people, as people who are just a little bit different. And so that's something that together, as we see it more clearly, I think we can work to address a bit more effectively. And it does take our collective action to address that. So I think that's where I'll end things, as I hope this is taken as an invitation to keep learning, maybe reach out to Melissa, see what's on the bookshelf, and and just continue to realize, right, that all together, that we're on this journey together of finding what it is words we use and respecting the words that each of us uses. Could I maybe share the floor just for any last remarks on kind of what has been shared before we pass it back to Sarah to close up our time together?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up the correcting aspect, as that's really important, and especially when queer and trans people aren't in the room, when that person, that family, friend, client isn't in the room, you still need to refer to them correctly, right? And that comes down to practicing as well, because the more you do it, the more it's going to become a habit, and the more it's going to be easier for you to do that. And then correcting other people when they mess up. There's this unspoken pact within the trans community where we intervene on one another's behalf because it's so hard to correct when people misgender us. So we correct for our trans friends and for our trans family, right? I was on a Zoom call with maybe like 10 other trans people, and there was one cis person in the room who misgendered one of us, and immediately everybody either unmuted themselves and corrected or sent it in the chat, right? That unspoken pact, that community feeling. And it's important for allies to engage in that too. Engage in that practice of correcting and intervening on our behalf. And then providing that one-on-one support, showing up beyond just Pride Month, right? A lot of times, like, it's emotional labor just to exist in the world as a queer and trans person. We experience minority stress, but especially when we're seeing things like what's happening in the United States right now with all of the anti-trans bills. And every year when the Trans Day of Remembrance comes up, November 20th, when we're hearing about these legislation against our community, even though we're not in the United States, like anywhere where we're seeing this legislation, where we're seeing these violent acts towards our communities, that takes a toll. It takes an emotional toll, because this is our family. And it's important to check in with, family, with friends, with clients, just saying, like, I know that things are a lot right now. Like, how are you doing? How can I support you? And it's really important to ask, like, how can I support you, rather than just assuming? Because maybe the person wants to vent, maybe they want advice, maybe they want a distraction, or maybe they just want a coffee, right? So checking in with them and what they need is really, really important. and just being with them, walking with them in that process and in that journey, and being with them through the ups and downs and everything in between, right? Just through that entire journey is really important, in creating that affirming and inclusive and safe space for everybody. I'll pass it over to Melissa for any closing thoughts.
That's great advice, Sydney. So we often use the word community, and I want to encourage people to join that community. And if you're not queer and you're not trans, that's okay, because you can join our community as an ally. So solidarity with other equity-seeking populations is super important. There are definitely more than trans and queer people seeking equity in this world. And if we came together and we did all of these wonderful pieces of advice that we've all said today and more, we can definitely change a culture that we all know needs some changing. So I'm just gonna say that please join us, and let's make the world better.
I'm gonna say this without trying to sound cheesy, but I really have goosebumps right now. I honestly appreciate you all taking the time to teach me. I know you teach all the time and you have your educator hats on all the time. And I really am so touched with the fact that you're taking the time out of your day to teach me on my learning journey. I acknowledge that I have so much more learning to do and so much more work to put in. And I am on that journey and I am working on it. And there's still a lot more work for me to do. And I feel better equipped now. And truthfully, I really do. I feel like I know what the next steps are. And I know how to, like Derek said, not take a passive back seat. Get out there and do the work and put it in. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for helping me in my journey.
It was our pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for hosting this little panel today and being a part of that class and the placement and all the work that you've done to kind of invite us to share and have this chance to put on our hat proudly and say, we got something to share. So here it is. And, a big thanks to Trans Wellness Ontario for, doing the work it does through the many people who make it happen. I'm so thankful that we have this organization and I get to work with my colleagues and do kind of the impact that we do. And I do hope that many people enjoy this video. Feel free to reach out to the organization, I suppose. As Sydney shared, transwellness.ca. We exist in Windsor, Ontario. Our services can be reached a little bit beyond that. And it's really important that we take this invitation. And yeah, thanks all so much. I think take care. Ta-ta for now. Stay safe, everyone. Yeah. Okay, bye.